unmuted it.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to worship this morning to all who are here in person in the sanctuary and all who are joining us by Zoom.
Friends, we always acknowledge the territory at the beginning of our worship time together. We acknowledge that no matter where we are, whether we are on Zoom or in the sanctuary in Markham, we are on land that has been occupied and lived on and that has sustained humanity for countless generations. And I acknowledge that from my home here in Canmore, I walk and meet upon the traditional territory of the Ayarhe Nakota, Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley nations, all who are signatories to Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. And I also acknowledge the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We acknowledge in Markham that you walk and meet upon the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples. And we also acknowledge that in Markham, you are on treaty lands of the Williams Treaty. We recognize the history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land of all of these nations and the First Nations of the lands where you live, if you live on lands that were not named today. So welcome to worship at St. Andrew's. Our mission is inspiring faith, practicing compassion, and building connection in our community and the world. And our vision is to be creative and courageous people empowered by the Spirit to practice love, reconciliation, and justice with authenticity, to be a spiritual home where Jesus' love for all is visible as we serve our diverse and multi-generational community. And if you are worshiping from home and have a candle handy, I invite you to light that candle now along with me as a symbol of the light of Christ, in whose presence we meet. We have some announcements. I'm going to call on Brenda Walker to give us our first announcement. Brenda, who is our treasurer. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Spring is here, and I know it doesn't look like it today, but it is. And one of the signs of spring that I just love is the return of birds, robins, red-winged blackbirds, grackles, even the grackles. I love to see them in my backyard. They give me joy when I see them in the garden. There's one sign of spring, however, that does not give us joy. The potholes have returned to the St. Andrews parking lot. At our meeting this past week, the St. Andrews Council accepted a quote to effect repairs to the parking lot at a cost of about $7,600 plus tax. This will be coming out of our Heritage Fund. And we thought that we could use this pothole plight as an opportunity to replenish the Heritage Fund. So a challenge has been issued. There's a Kickstarter donation of $200, but any amount would be greatly appreciated. So please consider making a contribution to the St. Andrews United Church Heritage Fund. And let's fill our Heritage Fund as we fill our potholes. For more information, please see the announcement in the bulletin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda. And I'd just like to highlight other announcements. There are ongoing appeals for there's a United Church appeal for Ukraine aid in the Ukraine and those who are leaving the Ukraine for safety, and the sleeping children around the world. There has been a very generous outpouring of support once again for sleeping children around the world. So I encourage you to take note of those announcements and others in the bulletin today. So friends, those of you who are in the sanctuary, I invite you to take a look around, say hello to those you see around you, and those of us here in the Zoom room, I encourage you to scroll through the tiles and pass the peace of Christ. Friends, the peace of Christ be with you all. And I'll turn it over to Jeannie for our prayer of approach.
Let us pray. Waiting God, welcoming presence in the doorway, listening for the footfall, the squeak of the floorboard. Open your aching heart to us, those who look hopefully for a small light of hope to guide us home. Greet us with a loving embrace. Once more we pray, Amen. Please stand as you are able as we join Michael in singing hymn number 271, There's a Wideness to God's Mercy, verses 1, 4, and 5.
Friends, I realize that I did have another announcement that I didn't, that I forgot about. Today is Reverend Tim's regular monthly Sunday off. And I want to extend a huge note of thanks to Jeannie, who has stepped up on short notice to be our worship leader in the sanctuary with Tim not being there today. So thank you, Jeannie, so much. I really appreciate it. Friends, I'm going to invite you into a time of confession, and different parts of the service are reflected or are reflections of the story that we're focusing on, the prodigal. And so I invite you, if you feel comfortable doing so, this is going to be partly a body expression prayer. And so for the first part of the prayer, I invite you to hold your hands over your chest. And when it comes to the assurance of pardon, there will be an opportunity. We don't want to smack your family members who are on either side of you, those of you who are sitting at home with other people or in church, but just a warning. If you want to take part in this, please do, and there's no pressure to do so. But I invite you to come before God in a spirit of confession. Even as we approach your holy love in faith, O God, we know how often we turn away and refuse your generous welcome. Sometimes we doubt that we really are forgiven. We determine the limits of your mercy by measuring our own. We look at ourselves and fear that we are hard to love. We believe that we should go through more pain before we ask for your kindness, or feel that one more stumbling block in our human journey is too many for you to understand and forgive. We sigh in sadness and stop before we reach your outstretched arms. Holy One, in a moment of silence, we bring before you our prayers of confession. Friends, in faith, let us move towards a God of love who is already moving in grace towards us. I invite you to open your arms, to be received in welcome. We are all offered the peace of God. Come into the home of healing, forgiveness, and comfort, and accept the peace of God, who is our loving parent. Amen. Ilon is our reader today, and he will be reading from the Gospel of Luke. Over to you, Ilon.
Thank you, Shannon. The reading today is from Luke 15, verses 1 and 2, and 11 to 32. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that belonged to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. When he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? And here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his eldest son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you. I have never been disobeyed your command, and yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I can celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. So ends the reading.
Thank you, Ailan. Friends, I invite you to pray with me. Holy One, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This parable, the story of the prodigal, has within it such depth of connection with the human condition. It is a very complex story, getting into the messiness of family relationships. And it is also a story with the deep grace of the divine. The elements of the parable are well known. Two brothers, one parent. Although dad is still very much alive, the younger son cashes in his inheritance early, goes far away and wastes it all on the high life. Things go sour for him, and he drags himself home hoping to sign on as a farm servant because they survive. And he was not surviving. Parent receives child with open arms, kills the fatted calf, and all celebrate, except for the elder son, who is angered because he has remained faithful and on the job here at home without such fanfare. All is wrapped up with a statement of the parents' love for both children and the special rejoicing that the one who had been lost is now found. There's so many words emerge from this parable that could be the starting point for a sermon, beginning with the word prodigal. To be prodigal is to be wastefully extravagant. And there's always the question, it's known as the prodigal son, but is it the younger son with his wasteful lifestyle who is prodigal in this story? Or is it the forgiving father, extravagant at the lavish welcome home of this son? Well, the brooding elder son would probably say both. But there's other words, some positive and some not so positive, like wandering, redemption, welcome, forgiveness, renewal, embrace, worry, judgment, enabling, excess, resentment, greed, envy, lost, and found. And the word that has presented itself to me for today's message is estrangement. Back in October of 2019, in the Broadview magazine, the United Churches magazine, Lauren Sproul wrote a powerful piece talking about family estrangement and the struggle to find support when you're in that situation. fractured families surviving the heartache of estrangement. She writes, I've yet to meet a family that hasn't been touched by estrangement. I have friends who haven't spoken to their mothers in years, a classmate who didn't know where her uncle was living, and a confidant who admitted his life would be much easier if the sibling causing his mother such pain would just disappear. People suffering through estrangement often describe feeling judged or stigmatized and misunderstood. And as a result, they tend not to talk about their experiences, a reticence that has led to what some experts have called a silent epidemic. Now, this was called a silent epidemic 4 months before a worldwide pandemic. There's a wave of strained relationships and estrangements that are going unacknowledged and thus without any semblance of support. So, fast forward 2 years. So many more families have experienced estrangement in these recent 2 years, with families, communities, and congregations fractured along COVID lines. Prior to COVID, a number of congregants spoke to me over the years of their experiences of estrangement, and like Lauren described, often with layers of guilt and shame in disclosing that theirs was not a happy family. The harsh realities of the pandemic, with enforced isolation and deep fault lines showing up with compliance and non-compliance with regulations for public safety and risk management, to vaccine or not to vaccine, fracturing families and friends and communities. Family estrangement has been as widespread as the pandemic itself. The threat of estrangement has impacted my family. One of my kids and his partner have chosen not to be vaccinated. We have struggled with that. And I'm glad to say that we have maintained connection, but there's been a very real strain. Lauren Sproul, in the article, acknowledges the breadth of experiences that get held by this collective term, estrangement. She writes that estrangement is a loss, no matter which way you look at it. But for some, that loss brings much needed separation from relationships that were abusive, either physically, sexually, or emotionally. For others, estrangement just brings pain and may lead to agonized ruminations over what turned the relationship sour and how that might have been avoided. So we see, indeed, that there are times when estrangement is a gift, in fact, a lifesaver, in order to avoid toxic relationships. And there are times when it is so painful. It becomes the predominant lasting thought that keeps being revisited time and time again. How did this happen? Where did things go wrong? For those who have experienced a family estrangement, whether that was because someone left the family or was expelled by the family, or tried to return to the family but was not welcomed back with open arms, or who left the family for their own mental health, the parable of the prodigal may be hard to hear because it hits pretty close to home, especially if the estrangement was never resolved. The experience of being kicked out of the house, forcefully disowned, is an experience far too common for one particular group of people. And that is in the lives of the 2S LGBTQIA community. Otherwise, those who live and identify under the rainbow. Persons who hesitated to come out to their family and then paid the price when they did. Reverend Liz Edmond has written a very powerful book called Queer Virtue. Chinook Winds region and Pacific Mountain region both studied this book together as part of those two regions working to become affirming regions. And it was a very powerful book to study together last Lent. And she writes, the experience of familial brokenness is familiar to far too many queer people. She says, I'm one of the lucky ones, blessed to have nearly unequivocal support from my family of origin. But even the fortunate few like me are only 1 or 2 degrees of separation from heartrending stories of familial rejection and violence. Our community has in recent years begun to pay deeper and much needed attention to the plight of homeless and runaway youth. Our concern for these kids is personal. Studies estimate that as many as 40% of homeless and runaway youth are queer. Many of them are children and young adults who were thrown away by their parents or who ran away to escape emotional or physical abuse. Many, many queer adults either were one of those kids or know someone who was. End quote. She goes on to write how through history, queer people were, well, invisible in public. It's not talked about, but they found each other, and they created family, and they created safety for each other. Congregations that have become open and affirming are learning the amazing gifts of hospitality, warmth, and healing that the queer community brings wherever and whenever they are enfolded. These are some of their queer virtues, and how badly the church needs queer virtues. Church has become so much better at compassion as they grow in their affirming identity. Learning to become public, intentional, and explicit about a church community embracing affirming values lets the broader community know that there is a safe religious space for them. And that's why it has to be public, intentional, and explicit, because the common understanding is that churches are far from being spaces that are safe and embracing for queer people. So congregations who are affirming aim to hone their skills at becoming safe and loving places where there is no need for closets, there's no need for hiding parts of personal identities. And on the flip side, for the affirming community, they do really need to be ready to be authentically welcoming and make sure that they truly are safe spaces for all people. That doesn't happen overnight. So a church that claims an affirming identity but does not provide non-gender washrooms has not yet learned how to be a safe and welcoming space for all queer folk. So shifting gears here, beyond families and church communities, there are some bigger ways that estrangement works in this world of ours. While the parable portrays it in very personal terms, there are many ways that this model of leaving home for greener pastures can be applied to the entire human experience. And biblically, the motif of estrangement or expulsion is strong in stories like the Garden of Eden, Cain and Abel, the dynamics of Joseph and his brothers, and God's yearning for reconciliation expressed through the Psalms and the prophets. And all those disciples who left their homes and their families and wives and followed Jesus. And yes, there is the cross. The truth and reconciliation processes that have been taken or being undertaken in many nations, like Chile and South Africa, Rwanda, El Salvador, and Canada, among others, illustrate the hard work that is required to rebuild safe relationships when there has been a domination of culture and disrespect of land. And so many wars, like the one being waged by Russia in Ukraine, and the ongoing hostilities between the two halves of the Korean Peninsula, and the strife in Israel and the occupied territories, are between foes with very close, even familial ties. And whatever formal process brings peace will need to be followed by a lot of work at the relationship level. And then there is our relationship with planet Earth. This fits all too easily into the wasteful living motif of the youngest son. What will it mean environmentally for us all to come to our senses, come to ourselves like the youngest son, and return home again? With all of these tales of separation and isolation in mind, we remind ourselves that ultimately this is not a story that ends in estrangement, much the opposite. There is a moment when the young one realizes there is no future, literally. He will starve to death if he continues in his present path. And so he turns around. He remembers home, and something in his remembrances of home, his remembrances of his father, even as he plans to become not a son, but an employee, and look at his father not as a father, but as an employer, he sees the compassion. It gives him some glimmer of hope. And more than that, when he does return home, there is welcome, joyous welcome that was beyond his wildest expectations. Whether there is restoration of the younger one's position in the family, well, that really is beyond the scope of the parable. It looks like that probably was the case with the party that took place. But what we do know is that he was home. He was safe. He was welcomed, and he was still deeply loved by his parent. While we may at a human level wonder about the father's boundaries in this story, and I admit that the older brother's grievance is legitimate, that there's work to be done to make sure that the estrangement just didn't transfer from one son to another. We remind ourselves that this isn't just a human story. This is a story about all those ways that we create distance between us and God's desire and ability to reach out to us and to bridge that gap. It's a story about the hardest times in life, the times when we feel most alone or alienated or lost, being held in a container that assures us of God's everlasting desire to see things made right. It's a story of our freedom to make choices and God's willingness to reach beyond what is reasonable to help us find a sustainable, life-giving, justice-based shape for our lives. My life, your life, and our lives, the life of humanity on this planet. That welcome, that parent running down the path upon the news of the child returning, makes a beautiful picture when imagined in its original setting. My prayer is that we can perceive it as something that reaches beyond that place, long ago and far away, into any and every situation where it is needed in the world today. That people in peril will find healthy ways of living, that nations and cultures will find new reconciled pathways, and the light of peace will break through the horror and gloom of war. So may the words of a story be experienced as a living expression of God's love for the world, for us, even here and even now. May it be so. Amen. Friends, we're going to sing the full hymn that we've been learning, like a healing stream. And today we are singing verses 1 through 4. Let's join Michael.
restless current, spirit water rushing on to distant shore. God is carving out a channel in a new direction, calling for an end to hate and war, like a river strong, like a mighty sea, reaching for horizons. Spirit water with a love both deep and wide. God is working in our hearts to shape a new tomorrow. God will always challenge and provide, like a mighty sea, like a river strong, like a gentle rain, like a healing stream.
Friends, there are so many ways that this community gives. People are giving of themselves in ways that we have no idea, and yet together we are like a healing stream. And the many ways are also like a gentle rain and a river strong and a mighty sea, all coming together with efforts to bring healing and wellness to the earth. And so I want to say thank you for all of your gifts of time and treasure and talent. Let's sing a hymn of dedication for all that is given in being a part of this family of faith. And we sing with Michael, "Your work, O God, needs many hands."
Your work, O God, needs many hands to help you everywhere, and some there are who cannot serve unless our gifts we share.
And we're going to be moving on directly into the sung response for Lent, where we are saying, "Open our hearts, open our minds, open our lives to you, O loving God." We sing through this twice at the beginning of the prayers of the people, and we sing it again at the end. And we have a different kind of Lord's Prayer coming after the end of the prayers of the people today. So I will turn it over to Michael and Jeannie to take us into our sung prayer response.
Open our hearts, open our minds, open our lives to you, O loving God. Open our hearts, open our minds, open our lives to you, O loving God.
God of patient love, you await the return of the wayward and wandering and eagerly embrace them in pardon. Through baptism, you have clothed us with the glory of Christ and restored our inheritance. Give us generous hearts to welcome all who seek a place at the table of your unconditional love. May the arms of our church be wide open to greet all who fearfully approach us in trembling hope for a welcome. We give you those who are held gently in our prayers, a place at your table in faith, O God, in the hope that one day all will sit at the feast of love side by side. Let us bring to God the prayers for ourselves, those known to us, and prayers for all who are suffering in our world right now in a moment of silence. Make us true to our calling, Jesus Christ, welcoming of the lost within us, among us, and beyond us. We gather all of our prayers together as we close this time of prayer and sing once again, Open Our Hearts.
Open our hearts, open our minds, open our lives to you, O loving God. Open our hearts, open our minds, open our lives to you, O loving God. Open our hearts.
And we do have a closing hymn, Let All Things Now Living, Voices United, number 242. So let's join Michael and Jeannie as we sing this closing hymn.
Let all things now living a song of thanksgiving to God our Creator triumphantly raise, who fashioned and made us, protected and stayed us by guiding us on to the end of our days. God's banners are o'er us, pure light goes before us, a pillar of shining forth to the light. Till shadows have vanished, and darkness is banished, as forward we travel from light into light. My Lord God impulses the stars in their courses, and sun in its orbit obediently shun. The rivers and fountains we too should rejoicing on love and rejoicing with glad adoration, till all things now living unite in thanksgiving to God in the highest, Hosanna and praise. Go now in peace, never be afraid. God will go with you each hour of every day. Go now in faith, steadfast, strong, and true. Know God will guide you in all you do. Go now in love and show you believe. Reach out to all the
Friends, time and time again, God waits for us with open arms. And with open arms, we return to God. So go out into the world to be God's loving embrace to others. May it be so. Amen.